from, what I've learned over the years, but I'm developing my ideas, and I'm open to, they're always evolving, and all of the invitations that I'll be offering here today will be just that. And if there's anything that doesn't resonate with you, let it go. No need to participate. Feel free to listen to your body and your heart. And if you're like, no, I don't want to do this, just, feel free to listen to that. You're welcome to have your video on or off. You're welcome to change that at any point. I just want you to feel as comfortable as possible and to let this be a space that's grounded and serving all of our collective liberation. So honoring our bodies and their needs is a part of that. So I want to start off by kind of showing the difference between talking about storytelling and actually storytelling. So I'm going to start off by pulling up my screen share. And let's see. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about why storytelling. And after this, I'm going to tell a story that's about why I care about storytelling. And I want you to feel the difference in your body between talking about it in the abstract and experiencing a story, and what that does internally as you experience both of these. So why storytelling? Stories are like a party for your brain. We can't help but love them. They release all kinds of feel-good chemicals, oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin. And we've evolved to love stories because they help us survive. They're one of the things that make us human, and that humans have been practicing since the beginning of time. And we all have ancestors in our lineage who spent many, 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 many evenings around the fire listening to stories. And that was the way that they came to feel connected to themselves and their community and the cosmos, and where they learned lessons on how to survive. And stories are a way of sharing information that helps us survive. So our brains are designed to love stories because they teach us how to overcome problems. They're a safe way for us to try hard things without actually having to do every hard thing ourselves. And stories allow us to create order out of the chaotic. They allow us to find a thread of meaning and put it together out of the wildness of existing on Earth. And they do this by editing out irrelevant details, defining a cause for each effect. And stories are designed to persuade an audience of a storyteller's worldview. So they're a way of sharing our wisdom, our perspectives, and our beliefs. And stories literally synchronize brains. I kind of lost my shit when I read the research around this, that like literally the audience, when you're hearing a story, the brain will light up in the same place as the storyteller, and literally as if you're experiencing the same thing yourself. So stories are how we express meaning and share values. And those are some of the main reasons why storytelling. So now I'm going to tell a story, which is why I believe stories can shift culture, or what happened when I told my story to my family. So I just want to give a little bit of a content warning. I am going to mention a story of sexual assault, but I'm not going to tell any details about what happened. And I won't go into anything in any depth of the actual trauma. Just giving a heads up, if anyone already knows that don't have capacity to hear something about that, then feel free to just mute, and I'll give a little wave when I'm done. But this is a story that is really important to me, and I'm really excited to share. So the story begins with me standing outside my family's house door, and I was absolutely terrified. On the other side of that door, all 11 of my immediate family members were waiting for me. And I honestly felt like I was going to die. I felt like I was doing something that was so terrifying. And I knew that if I were to survive, that it would change my life. But let me back up a little. The story really begins with, growing up as one of 10 kids in a big Catholic family in California. And when I think back to my childhood, it's one of chaos and intensity and connection and a lot of laughing and a lot of fun, but also, yeah, it was a lot. That's what I'll say. And I remember hiding in the bathroom when my mom would cook chicken nuggets, because you just couldn't trust that they wouldn't be taken off your plate. You had to protect your food. So I would run into the bathroom and nibble them, because that was the only place I could feel safe. And I also remember being in the bathroom to hide when my dad was being violent and when I wanted to feel safe and just have a place I could lock the door. Another memory that stands out to me is we had something called the Eskers, which was our version of the Oscars. My last name is Escobar. So we came up with all these categories and voted for, who had the best hair, the best fingernails, the most fun, the smartest. And I remember one year, probably when I was about 6 years old, I was the only person of everyone to not win any of them. I just sat there all dressed up, waiting to receive my, soccer trophy that we were using as a prize, and just never hearing my name and kind of just sitting there being like, wow, am I even seen? Like, do I exist? And I became, kind of a second parent to my little brothers. I have 5 little brothers, and I really helped raise them. And that was an incredible form of meaning for me, even if, now looking back, I can see that that was a lot to take on at a young age. But eventually I left, and I moved to New York, went to NYU, and lived in New York for 8 years, where I fell in love with photography and video making and storytelling. I survived and left an abusive relationship, and I built a storytelling company and met incredible people, getting to hear their life stories, and I found so much meaning and connection in that. And eventually, after 8 years, I decided to move back to California and be close to my family again. And, one day, probably a week before I moved back home, I had a panic attack on the sidewalk, actually outside of CSI, the place where I met Jen, or not met Jen, but where we spent a lot of time together. And I had a panic attack because I realized that I was going back to this family that I had, I'd kind of buried a lot of what had happened. And I realized that there was a buried secret that I had been holding for 10 years that I had never told anyone. And being in New York and living my passion had allowed me to kind of bury that and keep it buried. And now that I knew I was going home, I was so overwhelmed. And so I called my mom and I let her know what I was overwhelmed by. And she encouraged me to go to therapy. And I moved to California, went to therapy, and over the next year and a half did every single thing that I possibly could to keep my mental health in a good place, but it continued to deteriorate. And that leads me to being outside of that door, waiting for all 10 members of my family. And in an event that we called The Reckoning, my sisters had organized this. And so I opened the door and I stepped through, and I saw my 6 brothers, my 3 sisters, and my 2 parents sitting in our living room. And I told them the story about how I had buried being sexually violated by my younger brother for 10 years. And for an hour and a half, I rode the waves of telling my story. And just like now, there were moments where emotion was coming through, and I just opened to it, and I used my hand to steady me as I told it. And it came out, each phase of it just poured out this prayer to no longer be silent, and to no longer have to feel invisible in my family, and to finally bring forth the truth that I had buried. And I named my vision for my family, what I wanted for us, the vision that I was holding, that we would be transformed by confronting this together, that we would see the legacies of violence and violation that we had inherited as a family, and that we would choose to each recognize our part in interrupting those lineages. And when I was done, my younger brother, who violated me, got up and kneeled in front of me, in front of my whole family, and apologized from the depths of his heart, as he had done one-on-one with me beforehand. And he said that he knew that what he had done was wrong, and that it had would affect me for the rest of my life, and that he loved me, and that he would do anything he possibly could to heal the wounds that he had caused. And when he was done, we were crying, staring at each other, and our whole family got up and stood around us in a circle, and they put their hands on us. And one by one, without prompt, they each started saying, "I was complicit. I was complicit. I was complicit." And I felt like our ancestors were right there with us. It was this crazy feeling I can't even describe. And I literally saw these chains breaking. You know, I heard the voice of them saying, "Speak with a shaking voice." And so afterwards, I ended up inviting everybody to chant with me, which now I look back and I'm like, wow, I can't believe this actually happened. But I had everybody chant with me, "Power with, not power over. Power with, not power over." That this was our prayer together, that we would live into a culture of power with, not power over. And so when I left the room that day, I felt free and seen and not invisible for the first time in my family, truly seen. And I knew that I was an agent of liberation for my family, that my story was a part of our collective healing. And that is why I believe so deeply in storytelling, because it has been a part of my journey. It's been a part of my family's journey. It's been a part of how I offer my gifts in the world, to say that if we tell stories of truth, if we tell stories of depth, if we tell stories of courage, if we tell stories that challenge dominant narratives, that name systems of violation and how they affect us, that we can create a different culture, and we can create one rooted in care, collective care, and one rooted in honoring the dignity and sanctity of every single person. And so that is why I believe in storytelling. And I want to thank you for listening. And I just want you, feel free to write in the chat or to come off mute for a second. What do you notice about how that story affected you versus kind of just talking about why storytelling matters? Like, did you feel any difference viscerally or in your body?
Thank you for sharing. That was really incredible. And I appreciate that you would be that open with such a story. Yes, I felt it from head to toe.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I'd say, when we're talking about storytelling, it was very more in my head, like intellectual, and listening to your story, I felt it like everywhere in my body, like in my heart. I got the chills. It was like feeling like it in my chest, and it was just a much more like full body experience.
Thank you. Yeah. Whew, let's just all take a breath together, if you don't mind, if you're feeling up for it.
I wanted to say you're very courageous. It takes a lot to do that. And I bet you the first time you did it, it felt like a huge weight had been lifted. And each time you tell it, I bet you feel more removed from it and freer from the emotion, and can tell it like it's, like you're not in the pain part. And that's a good thing.
Exactly.
And when you're telling your story, for me, it triggered, not necessarily in a bad way, but it reminded me of with mine, and telling people about it as a story like that way is probably easier than the other way. And there are some people that I still need to tell that to. So it gives me encouragement to try it that way. Thank you.
Thank you. And, I think part of what I wanted to share in the story is that, sometimes when we're sharing stories, like big emotion can happen. And we can ride those waves, we can trust ourselves to continue to speak with a shaking voice, and sometimes, it feels a lot easier to tell a story and sometimes it doesn't, but kind of trusting whatever version of it is ready to be told is where I find kind of the ability to accept myself where I am. All right, so moving on. I'm just going to start this screen share again. All right, so I had some other elements. I thought we had 2 hours mistakenly, so there's some slides I'm going to skip because I realized we do not have that amount of time, and I apologize for that. So the stories that we tell create the culture that we live in, and as we understand our lives, we understand them through story. And so we ask these questions: who am I? What makes me me? How is the world? Why is the world the way it is? When we answer those questions, we answer them in story. So I want to talk about the difference between a story and a narrative really quick. So a story is an event unit. Can I ask you
a quick question? The slides that you're using?
Yeah.
Would we be getting copies of these?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you'll get them for sure. So no need to write everything. So a story is an event unit. It's the who, what, when, where, and how of an event that occurred. It has a beginning, middle, and end. And a narrative is a system of stories. So 2 or more stories that add up to create a larger narrative. And the narrative is, what do these stories tell us about how the world is? And a narrative is more open-ended rather than time-bound. It's more about the meaning. If you think about the message of the Bible versus the stories of the Bible, the message is the narrative and the stories are the individual vehicles that add up to that meaning. So I think of it like a narrative is the whole ocean and the story are the little fishies inside of it. So your story isn't your experiences, it's the meaning you give to those experiences. Or I guess your story is the individual elements of things that have happened, but the narrative is the meaning that you ultimately take from them. So what makes a story a story? Time has to pass, a beginning, middle, and end, and something has to happen. And the essential element is change. So the person isn't the same at the beginning at the end as they were at the beginning. Something about the events changes whoever's telling a story or whoever the story is about. So each character pursues some type of goal in accordance with his or her values or their values. This is an old slide. Facing difficulty along the way and either succeeds or fails according to how the storyteller's view of the world works. So basically, not every story is going to end with something great happening, but it will tell you something about how the storyteller sees the world. So stories describe the journey from problem to solution, potentially. So I faced this problem, which affected me in this way. Then I had this realization, which led me to this solution. Or stories can describe a journey from question to answer. So I was in this situation, which made me ask this question. I faced these challenges as I searched for the answer. Then I had this experience, which made me realize this answer. Or from a misconception to a deeper truth. I had this experience, which led me to this misconception, which had this cost. Then I had this experience, which made me realize this deeper truth. So these are just some of the basic, not structures, but kind of the different possibilities. And basically the point here is just to say it's not always about a problem to a solution, but there's some journey from one thing to another. So the basic structure of a story is you start in the beginning, you have the hook. That was me saying, I was outside the door waiting to go in. I'm basically trying to open a question in your mind. Then you're going to set the stage and introduce who, what, when, where. So you're going to give some context. So I'm more just going to go through this story arc right now. And we have a place later where you're going to break it down step by step for your own stories. So more take this in on the whole rather than focus on, memorizing each element. So then you're going to face a problem. You're going to present the problem. So include a detail or anecdote about how that challenge was experienced. So I gave some details about my childhood and what it was like to not win an award at our family award show. Then we've got our journey to change. So the struggle of the journey makes the character change. So that was me going to New York, trying to live my life, trying to individuate, and eventually realizing that I have to come back and confront what I've been avoiding. So the moment of change, the aha moment, ground it in a specific location. So that was me, realizing calling my mom, realizing I needed to like take action, stepping through that door and telling my story. And the moment of change really was around like my brother, like kneeling before me and my family owning their responsibility and feeling the healing of that. And then after, so how is life different because of this realization? So, I got to feel free again. And the call to action. So relate the story back to your audience and empower them to apply the moral of the story to their lives. So that was me saying that, stories have the power to change our collective culture. So this is a quote that somehow the person attributed to it got deleted, so I need to figure out who said it. But the problem is not that each society constructs itself as a story, but that it forgets that it has done so. So I think the important thing here is that communities are groups bound by shared values. And through storytelling, you can communicate your values so your audience can say, hey, I believe that too. And your story's creating a shared sense of connection through the values that are expressed through it. I'm going to keep it moving because I want to make sure we have time to get to the good stuff. So dominant narratives are the armor of oppressive systems. So basically, the stories that uphold oppression in our society are fueled, oppression is fueled by stories that justify it. And there's some ways that narratives normalize the status quo and make systems of oppression seem like they're inevitable and this is just the way it has to be. So one of the ways that dominant narratives normalize the status quo is by invisibilizing oppression. So we have, if you look at the media, you'll see a lot of folks talking about, pick yourself up by your bootstraps, just work hard, but it's completely denying like the actual context of harm that leads people to live in poverty. How narratives normalize the status quo. They universalize certain experiences. So they peddle stereotypes that create a singular narrative about who people are that is designed to justify oppression. Narratives normalize the status quo through creating a sense of inevitability. There is no alternative. This is the way it's been. This is the way it's always going to be. And they make it seem like, there's no other possibility than to exist in the systems as they are. So I believe that if we want to challenge injustice, we have to change the stories that perpetuate it. So some of the narratives that I see upholding oppression are inadequacy narratives that tell us that we're not good enough and that we are to blame for our own experiences of harm within a system. Separation, that we don't belong to each other, we don't belong to the earth, that we have no ability to connect across difference, and inevitability, like I said, that there's no ability to change things because this is just the way they are. So some of the new narratives that I see as alternatives to those old narratives, kind of the roots and the soil that can bloom new possibilities for collective liberation, are narratives of wholeness and connection and power. So we are already enough. We don't need to prove ourselves. We belong just because we exist. we have the ability to connect with one another, and our connection is powerful. And we have power. We create these systems, and we can create different ones. So I see this as kind of the next iteration of that story and narrative ocean. So the inadequacy ocean would have, media, institutions, and cultural messages all fueling experiences of not being good enough. I definitely experienced that in the school system. And then these fish are like our individual experiences that then end up adding up to that. So I ended up believing I wasn't good enough because of these specific experiences that became evidence in my personal narrative of not being good enough. But then if I were to go to a wholeness ocean, I would have soul connection, earth connection, ancestral healing, friends and family all supporting me to know that I am whole and that I belong. And then I'd have individual experiences as these fish, which are, my gifts and my talents, experiences of feeling deep connection with my soul, the people who love me for me, experiences in my life where I saw that I do have power and that I do have the ability to honor my own self-worth. So when we realize that we write the story of our world, we realize that we have the power to create a better world. So the job of the conscious storyteller is to use narrative to create new frames. So I'm going to skip over this, but basically it's saying the old frame is power over and the new frame is power with. And the job of the conscious storyteller is also to use narrative to build movements. So I believe that when you create a narrative frame and then you deliver that through personal stories, that is the best way to awaken the world. That may be a lofty goal, but it's a way to bring people into the realizations that will allow them to join with us to take action for the world we want to live in. So I'm going to help you create your visionary narrative. And I'm going to break this down, but just here's the idea. This is how it's been, but this is how it could be. Here's how you can create this better world and why we need you to do that. So we're going to break that down in a little bit. So part of what I see as a storytelling strategy is creating this visionary narrative that says, here's how it could be, here's how it is, here's how it could be, and here's why you're needed to make that happen. And a story portfolio, which is, all the ways that you can share those stories through individual people's lived experience. And that's how we create a storytelling strategy, is finding our visionary narrative and communicating it through individual stories. So another way to say that is to create a storytelling strategy. You're going to create your brand or your campaign narrative, or your visionary narrative, your organizational, whatever scale of focus you're at the moment. And then figure out the smaller stories that you can tell which support that larger narrative. And then adapt those stories for various platforms and mediums and share over time through newsletters, videos, blogs, and various social media networks. So a story portfolio are the individual stories that add up to the visionary narrative. We're not going to go too deep into this, but it's all in the worksheets that I sent over. There's a breakdown of each of these kinds of stories. So this is kind of like, as you're thinking about the stories you might want to tell, these are some kinds that are powerful ways to invite people into joining you in the work that you're doing. And I'm going to let you all look into that on your own. So our first exercise is to find a piece of paper, and on that piece of paper, you're going to create a story map. And the story map is going to basically be an outline of different experiences in your life that have affected you. And I offer this model, which is a timeline, but you can create, be an artist, create your own map, draw pictures related to different experiences that you've had. So on mine, on the top of the timeline, I have outward moments, and on the bottom, I have inner shifts. So how did those outer moments affect me? So we're going to spend, let me just do a quick time check on where we're at. So we're going to have 10 minutes for this. And these are some prompts of things to think about, elements to put on your story map. So memories that you have that just stand out for some reason. You don't even know why it mattered to you, but you remember it. Times that you know were really important in creating beliefs that you have. Different ways that you tried to get your needs met at different points in your life, different indicators of societal messaging. You're basically creating like a visual map of your life and things that have mattered, and some sort of time progression within that. Any questions? Yeah.
Are we thinking about the like overarching story right now, or are we just like...
No. So this is just like a story dump. This is just like showing you some threads of what's important to you. If you already know kind of like things you are going to want to tell in your story eventually, like put them on there. They're important. But feel free to also include things that are just randomly popping into your mind, or, you know, things like moving that, you know, were just like, that happened. And this is a process that honestly you can go so deep with and spend a whole afternoon or a whole day or a whole month or a whole lifetime evolving. So if you feel sparked and like you're longing for more time and space, like honor that at another time, because it's a rich practice. I really quickly just want to share, I ended up taking my initial story map and buying a blank book, and basically creating like a timeline of my life through different, you know, visual elements. And it's hard to do this at the same time as looking at the screen, but basically different memories and points, and put images with them. And so I was like, it's just a book version of the map that's a timeline. So that was a really rich practice for me in my own story medicine process. So really quickly, I'm just hungry to hear if there's anything that anyone would be willing to share in the chat. How did that feel, or what did that stir in you? How did it feel to be in that process?
I'm still going through like my childhood, but I'm also seeing some of the same thought processes as an adult. Yeah, I still hear that inner child stories in my head.
Yeah, it's so powerful. I feel like it's really clear when you're like, oh wow, 7-year-old me was saying the same thing. Like, yeah. And if we had more time, I would offer another practice, which is to like choose some certain memories that you feel have a charge, and to visit them as your adult self, and to kind of bring your adult self into that moment, and to like either let your inner child speak to you or speak to your inner child, and then make sure you bring yourself back to the present moment afterwards, because it can be easy to kind of merge those selves if you're not careful. So but a loving practice with your inner child for sure. Thank you for sharing that, Sarah. All right, we will keep it moving for the sake of all we're trying to do. But I love that this process has been started, and I'm excited for each of you to hopefully spend more time with it. Let me share my screen again really quickly. So the next, okay. I'm just going to slightly adapt this for our time. So basically the next thing we're going to focus on is kind of building the structure of our visionary narrative. And the two key parts of that are painting a picture of how it is and painting a picture of how it could be. So if you were able to print out the worksheets, they take you through every single question on here in an in-depth kind of analysis of how it is and how it could be. But I also have the questions up here on the screen. And basically, we're going to spend a couple of minutes reflecting first on how it is. So when you think about kind of the context of what you want to change or what you don't want to be in existence in the world anymore, systems of oppression, narratives that you've received, that's kind of the picture we're creating for how it is. So for me, that's the context of growing up in violence and violation. So we're going to take 3 minutes to start exploring how it is. And on the worksheets, there's also this page that has a space for you to draw a picture of how it is. So I'd love for you to kind of explore some of the questions around how it is, but it would also be great to draw a picture of how it is that represents kind of the status quo, the world as it is, the untransformed potential that you seek to see transformed, if that makes sense. All right. So now we're going to take another 3 minutes to envision how it could be. So another part in the worksheet, but basically, instead of the dominant narrative, what do you believe to be true? How do you believe we should imagine the possibility as it exists? What world do you believe to be possible? What systems do you believe to be possible? What way of being do you believe to be possible? And again, feel free to draw a picture of how it could be. That can be an easier access point sometimes. And in the last minute, try to imagine that world actually existing and try to imagine a specific scene. Like what's a scene that's actually happening in this alternate world? What are people doing together? Or not together? What are people doing? So just one more prompt, and feel free to jump back into where you're at because you're gonna have a couple more minutes. The last piece is exploring the bridge. So what's the bridge between how it is and how it could be? What are the new beliefs that can help us create how it could be? What will it take to create that reality? How must people act, or what must they, my little sidebar's blocking that, or what, oh, that's because it doesn't make sense. Or what must they do differently to allow us to live in that reality? So what are the actions that you believe will help us to create the bridge between how it is and how it can be? All right, so a couple more prompts that'll give you time to finish whatever you're doing. I'd love for you to go to your story map and to see if there's a memory on your story map that represents how you experienced how it is. So is there any memory that you already put down or that you want to add of when you experienced the way that it is? Kind of your first, the first prompt that we did. And then same goes for, are there any memories connected to how it could be? Moments you realized something else was possible, moments that showed you some understanding of how else things could be. And are there any memories that gave you evidence of why the bridge might be the bridge? So feel free to circle any memories that are connected to these three concepts: how it is, how it could be, and the bridge between them. So basically, I'm going to guide you through building a combination of your visionary narrative communicated through personal stories. So the first step is to identify your audience. So for today, I was thinking about what story I should tell. I have my whole life of experience that I could have shared. So I said, let me think about who my audience is, and let me think about what my goal is in telling this story. So I knew that I wanted to, speak to you all about the power of storytelling and why it can help shift culture. So 3 kind of main levels you might think about, and as a goal in telling a story is to create awareness, to change attitudes, or to influence behavior. So kind of identifying where your audience is at already. And I had a sense that you all had an interest in storytelling and you probably already believed in it. So I was thinking more about influencing behavior. So giving you some courage to tell some stories you might be scared to share. That was my goal. So feel free. We're going to go through each of the steps. And if you want to take a moment to think about a place where you might want to share a story and to think about who the audience is and what your goal would be. And sometimes influencing behavior is just donating, or feeling connected to your movement, or joining your membership, or, signing up for your next, organizing session, whatever kind of work you do. Can think about how what is that next step you want someone to take? So I'm going to keep it moving along. So the next step is to identify your aha moment. So you're going to think about where your audience is now, where you want them to be, and what is the realization that they need to get there. So whenever I have client calls with a new nonprofit video client, these are my first questions. I'm always like, who's your audience? What do you hope that they'll do after watching this video? And what's the one realization that you would want them to have while watching it or hearing your story? So a couple examples thought I had in here. Okay, I do. So you're going to build a story around your aha moment. So you're going to think about the shift in perspective you want the audience to have. And you might ask yourself, when did you have an experience that brought you to that shift in perspective? Do you have a story of when you had that shift in perspective yourself? So an example of that, if you're asking yourself, what story can I tell to make my audience have this aha moment? So I might think my audience is thinking they're bad at storytelling, and I want them to say, I can tell powerful personal stories. So the aha moment I might want them to have is that with practice, courage, and heart, I can become a more confident storyteller. That would be kind of like the meaning that the story detonates in the mind of the audience. So if my audience is young people who have given up, they don't believe they can create change, and I want them to take action and believe that they have something to contribute, the aha moment is potentially, I am powerful, change is possible, I can create something that matters. So I might ask myself, when did I realize that I was powerful? When did I start believing that change was possible? When did I create something that matters? And that might bring a template that invites them into that realization themselves. So this is kind of a longer one, but let's say my audience is other white people, and I know that they are saying to themselves, that they want to prove that they're one of the good white people. They have denial of their racism. They're unwilling to see how they uphold white supremacy. And I want them to join me in actively working to dismantle white supremacy. So they may need to have the aha moment that my unwillingness to admit my own racism and complicity in white supremacy causes harm. And I will admit my own racism and work to develop resilience in the face of white fragility. So I might build a story around coming to that realization myself. When did I start to have more shame resilience? When did I start to realize that I could love myself as a white person? When did I come to realize that I do, in fact, possess the racism that I was pointing out in others? I'm going to keep it moving. So that aha moment is the core message. So that's kind of the guiding light that you're going to use as you decide what to include in your story and what not to. Because you have a million life experiences, infinite, but you're going to have to choose your details. So your core message is going to be the thing that helps you check in with what to include in your story and what not. So when I'm editing a video and I have so many great quotes and I just can't narrow it down, I write out what is my core message, and then I ask myself, does this quote take me there? Or does this quote really a detour, you know? So what do you believe we need to realize in order to create the world that you believe is possible? So that's the core message for this practice. So one good way to frame this core message is to try and include the word you in it. So your story can change the world. You have power, kind of making it directional to your audience. It's another way to make it more oriented towards action and towards your specific audience. So I'm going to take you through building the structure of the story. And this is our main outline. So I'm just going to walk you through it kind of at the top end, and then we're going to take some time to see how much of it you can fill in right now. So at the beginning of the story, you're going to have a hook. You're going to want to open a question in the mind of your audience as quickly as possible. You really want people to be wondering, you know, what's going to happen next, or how is this, you know, I said I knew that walking through that door would change my life. That probably made you wonder, like, why is this so meaningful? Why is this something that was so important to them? So then you're going to share a personal story about how you realized how it is, or a personal story that just demonstrates how it is. Then you're going to share the cause and the cost of how it is. So what was the outcome of experiencing this reality? What was the cost of growing up in a patriarchal family, for example? Then you're going to share a personal story about how you realized how it could be. So I shared the story of realizing that I could share my story in front of my family. I could break my silence. I wouldn't die. My family wouldn't ostracize me. And I realized that storytelling could be a powerful mode of healing for all of us. So then share your vision of how it could be. So then you're going to paint a picture vividly of what would happen if more people did this. So what would happen if more people courageously shared their stories, if more people believed that their stories mattered, for example. And then you're going to have your call to action. And that is your invitation to your audience to take that step alongside you. So you're basically saying, you're inviting your audience to be a part of the change that you've realized is possible. And you're telling them that their actions are a meaningful contribution towards seeing how it could become a reality. So that's the main outline. I'm trying to figure out how much we have time for. We have about 10 minutes left. My original breakdown was going to have you go through each step of this to put it in your own personal terms. But I feel like I would love, you'll get this presentation. So you can break it down. You have some memories that you've identified are connected to this vision. You have your vision, you've focused on your bridge. And now it's really just putting it all together. So after you, basically the next steps would be to fill out each part of the story structure, break it down, and then to map it out, kind of draw the structure. So I've included several possibilities in the worksheets. I gave some different story arcs that you can use as templates to fill in based on the kind of story that you're telling. And then you're going to write your story from beginning to end. Practice saying it out loud. And I have a whole bunch of other stuff about how to create tension in your story and how to refine your story after you're at that point. But basically, I'll just show you what I ended up doing. So eventually what I do is I create a like an index card with each part of the story on it. So here it says, number 1, context. Number 2, conflict. Number 3, journey to change. Number 4, climax. Number 5, conclusion. Number 6, call to action. And so what I did before today in telling my story, I'll show you the outline of, so this was today's outline. And that's basically, earlier today, I just wrote out each step of the story. I didn't write it out in its entirety. I just said, hey, here's the plot points we're going to go through. Here's the outline. And then you infuse that with your own words. So sometimes I used to memorize every story to tell it exactly the same way. And what I realized works better for me is to create a structure, map out the plot points, know the journey that I'm going to go on, and then to infuse it with authentic connection in the moment. And I think one of the most important elements of this is to know that everything that you end up deciding you're going to share in your story already lives within you and is already a truth that you know and that you connected with. So after you create a map for yourself, it's not so much about delivering it perfectly. It's about trusting yourself to know that you know what needs to be shared and that you have it within you, that you have the gift of the story within you, and that you can share it and have it be received. A couple final thoughts. We do not have one story. We are story multiverses, story kaleidoscopes. So you can hold the same raw material up to a new light and it all shifts. So there's not one story of your life. There's infinite versions of your life story that you could tell that would all be true. And you don't have to include every detail of your life in a story for it to be true. You don't even have to include every detail of something that was important to you. You get to choose what details you include every single time you tell your story. You don't owe anyone any specific detail. And a story is still true even if you don't include every single detail. So I found it really empowering to put vulnerability in my own hands, that I don't owe anyone any facts of my life, but that I can choose what I want to share as a part of the meaning that I'm trying to communicate through my story. Love for you to go through this more on your own. So this is one kind of final thought. So we share stories like a song that builds bridges, a bird carrying a message between us, a chance for us to find clues to our own mysterious unfolding, the dream of the earth becoming known through us. And your story matters because you matter. And that's just the facts. So we have a couple more minutes. I wanted to open it up to thoughts, questions, reflections, next steps. If you do have anything you're inspired to share next or to do next after this, I'd love to hear that. And if there's any other ways I can support you, let me know, and I'll be sending a follow-up email with the presentation, the worksheets, and another online storytelling course that I have that goes into a lot of detail about kind of making your stories magnetic and some other details on practical storytelling. But yeah, I'd love to hear, let me stop this share, either in the chat or feel free to unmute any questions or reflections or next steps.
I just want to say this was so illuminating, and I'm a creative, so I'm really very like I know the creative process really well, and to see it like storytelling broken down through the creative process is really empowering. I think people tend to think that they're good at speaking or good at telling stories, or they're not, like it's an innate thing. And to see that it broken down this way, and that we can get better at it, and that we have the power to control our narrative and communicate more clearly to, just be more true to ourselves is really great. I wish this was a continual series. Like I want more of this.
I will take that spark and run with it. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Hey, I just want to say thank you so much, Life. That was really powerful, and I didn't expect it to be this powerful. And I was also quite overwhelmed by the process, not in a negative way, but just it made me think a lot about the things that I went through in my life, and it's a lot, and there's a lot to process, and it makes sense why women are so tired, why we're so tired. I wanted to also share that I have this book called Your Story is Your Power. It's a book that, if anyone else is interested in knowing your story, I think it helps. But your method was really, really helpful and illuminating, as Helen shared. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And I did want to acknowledge that this can be stirring of a lot of emotion, and sometimes that's overwhelming in a good way, and sometimes that's overwhelming in a way that needs you to take a break. But I feel like there is so much power in just connecting the threads of our experience and seeing what led us to where we are. Like a lot of times when I'm interviewing people, the first question I'll ask is like, how did you end up here? And just see, what threads they start to connect of like, oh, here's where the story starts. And I feel like there's just so much richness in visiting our experiences and seeing how they've shaped us. And I love that you felt that.
I have a quick question. Well, I'll say a couple things. So first of all, this is amazing. Thank you. I definitely felt myself even being triggered by certain things, and realizing like I have so many different experiences and different stories that can relate to the message I want to give out and the work that I'm doing. So I'm a life and impact coach. I work with mission-driven people in the music industry who want to make impact in the world. And obviously I have my own things that I care about, that I want to make impact about. And most of my storytelling, I guess, happens on social media, both like Instagram and Facebook. So I guess if you have any tips on like, especially like with Instagram, when you're limited to like 2,200 characters and like a caption, like how to like be succinct in your storytelling when it's like something that's really powerful that you want to convey.
Totally. That's a great question. And, I'm constantly editing videos that like we do these hour-long interviews, and then the client wants a 2-minute video. And I'm just like, someone just poured out their whole life story to me. Yeah. And like, now I have to like package it for social media. And, what I always try to do is like, trust that the truth will come through no matter what length it is. And I give myself different, I don't try to make the 2-minute video right away. I make the 10-minute version of the video, and then I cut that down to the 7-minute video, and then the 5-minute, and then the 3-minute. And eventually I'm like, okay, we're getting there. Like we're at the 2 minutes, So I think it's giving yourself permission to like, let it pour out. Like, don't make yourself immediately come to the succinct version. Like, let the process unfold as a way of meaning making for yourself, so you can connect to what's important to you about the story. And then, even in your next steps, if it's not social media, I would recommend that you like, if you have a story you want to tell, like set a timer for 7 minutes and have yourself tell the story in 7 minutes, then set a timer for 3 minutes and be like, I have to tell the story in 3 minutes. Your brain will figure out what's important, and it'll adapt, and it'll let you know what really matters and what doesn't. So sometimes the like restraints can actually be a good way of helping us like connect to what's really important and true, and just trust that, like, you know, there's richness beyond what you're sharing that you get to hold in your own heart, and that not everyone is going to know every detail of everything, and they don't need to, but what's at the heart of it. And then going back to your core message and like what, using that as a guidepost. So if you're like, okay, we have a whole like detour here into like the college years that doesn't need to happen, you know, like focusing on, you know, trying to connect like 2 memories rather than 10, for example. So I always think about, 1 memory of how it is, 1 memory that shows how it could be, and then creating a link between them. And that keeps it nice and simple.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you so much, Life. This was life-giving. I feel empowered on so many levels that my brain is just kind of firing like too much. I have too many ideas, but I just wanted to acknowledge everyone in this group for, like, I feel like we're in a story sharing session right now. So I'm on the edge of my seat just waiting for someone to unmute themselves so I can hear your story or like what you got from this. And I'm just loving it. I live for like groups like this where people get to share a takeaway of, you know, what they took from the fire and how they're going to go spread the fire. Myself as, originally I had a professional career as a dancer, built some businesses as a dancer, nonprofit, for-profit, and had found myself kind of finding the story sharing aspect of it into more human development coaching. So that's really what the dance was about. It was about human development. And so now I'm kind of helping enlarge people's personal and their financial freedoms to be able to make practical moves, not just dance moves, but make practical moves in their life, is all centered around the stories, not only that we tell people, but mainly I find the breakthroughs happen when it comes to catching the stories we tell ourselves. And I was just dealing with that for the last 24 hours, you know, and the stories we tell ourselves impact how we will relate to the world, or if we do choose to say a story or share a story at all with another human being. And so I just feel like these tools were so clear and just kept it, you know, out of our head and out of like the ego that will make me defensive or make me try to make it look good or perfect. It was like, I want you to share this with like my whole team. I want you to share this with like your story needs, your tools need to be out in the world, because I truly believe it will heal us. And I felt like there was one other thing I wanted to share. Oh, I also feel empowered, since that was your question, to because I've been inspired to create a series of interviews. I want to interview people to draw out their stories. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of looking for people who have interesting stories of their perspective on how they see we can heal the world through their own personal realm of healing in their own life and their community. Maybe they've turned it into a business from their pain that can service people. So I felt like a little bit stuck in structure, but I feel like these questions can really help structure that to create a format of my own. So thank you for that.
I love that. And that's another idea. I know if you need to hop off. There will be follow-up email. But another idea I had recently was to have another workshop that's about how to do powerful interviewing to elicit personal stories. So I'm going to take that spark. But another thing I'll send in the emails, I wrote out, it didn't end up in the worksheet, but I wrote out kind of like, what are the questions I always ask people like in my interviews? Like if I want someone to share a story that's about connecting their personal life experience to their purpose and their mission, like I ask the same questions almost all the time, just for each person's experience. So I'm going to type that out and include that in the follow-up. And then you all can have that as well. And to be continued, I would love to have a follow-up session and I'll include more info on that. I'll ask Jen about that and see what we can make happen. Any
Just
other?
gonna second that, Sarah. Thank you for bringing that up and for including that, because I'm doing something, planning like an Instagram interview series where specifically around the music industry and social impact, and interviewing different people who are in that space. And like I keep getting stuck. I'm like, oh, what am I gonna ask? And like what are those things? So that's super helpful. Thank you.
Awesome. Yay. I'm glad it can be helpful. I'll wrap this up. Normally I would have had chance for you all to, or my original plan was for you to go into breakout rooms and actually get to share your stories. But unfortunately, we didn't have time for that because I misunderstood how long the session was going to be and didn't realize it until right before we started. So apologize for that, but really, really grateful for your participation and your love and your hearts and your presence. And you have so much beautiful wisdom to share in your stories. And I just want you to know your stories matter and you matter. And I love you all. Have a great night.
I have one thing to say before you get off. If you're going to do this again, if we participate in this one, the next one, do we get a discount for coming to the class?
I will work on those details and get back to you. Life and I will have a discussion, and you'll get like a full email of
Okay, I was just curious because like I'm a student and I have a very limited budget. So, I do like this, but it's like I said, it boils down to money, unfortunately. Just curiosity question. It was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Glad you were here.
Life, thank you so much. This was transformative and we all love you. This was amazing. Thank you all for being here, for making the time, and for sharing your stories. I'm excited to be in touch with you all about what round 2 of this could look like.
It's great. Thanks so much, Life.
Bye. Okay.